Welcome to the Unraveling Shaltazar podcast. Hello, Jeffrey.
Hello, Mark. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
Fine. I'm feeling fine. Considering we just came off of a new moon, and I'm finding those new moons and full moons a little bit interesting these days. But each time I go through them, I'm a little bit more prepared, and I don't feel as discombobulated when I'm discombobulated, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah. Maybe you're not blindsided by it because you're right. You're anticipating something's going to happen. You don't know what, and when it does, you're like, oh, okay, there it is, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And how have you been feeling over the last day or week?
Well, let's see. Actually, pretty good. I feel rather peaceful in the midst of a bunch of chaos, I guess, which is unusual, I think. I'm starting to develop a certain detachment from the world around me, perhaps. I don't know. But I live with a lot of females, and there's a lot of female energy constantly flying around, and I've learned that it's best not to jump into the swimming pool with it, and just to kind of stand on the deck and observe and answer questions when asked. So that's where I've been, I think. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that. What came to me when you said that is it may be an opportunity for you to get in touch with your feminine energy a bit more. You know me, yeah. I always believe, Shaltazar has taught us that I always believe there's purpose. And so, rather than being an outsider with all of that feminine energy, all of us, whether we're males or females, we have masculine energy and feminine energy. Mm-hmm. And so this may be an opportunity, and I know, having known you for a while and working with you, that there is that softer feminine feeling energy to you. And so I don't think the purpose of having all of those women in your household is to scare you away from your feminine energy, but instead to embrace it.
And how coincidental and appropriate that the message we want to talk about today is the authentic you. I remember listening to this message. It was recorded in 2017. I haven't been with you that long, but it was probably one of the earlier ones that I listened to, and I just kind of rediscovered it, I guess. And I remember when I listened to it, the thing that kind of whacked me over the head was this sentence here that says, how many of you feel you just don't fit in? How many of you feel uncomfortable because you don't fit in? And how many of you gave up the real you so you could try to be like others? That in many ways is the story of my life. I think when I was younger, I was very much attuned to that feminine energy. And when I say feminine energy, I mean, that softer creative side. I had a gigantic imagination. I was always pretending, making up stories, making up scenarios. You could leave me in a white room with no door for 3 days, and I would find plenty of things to do in there. Apparently, my parents considered the way I was to be different and not necessarily what they. My parents were both very, very concerned about the opinions of others. They're very self-conscious in that way, socially conscious, I guess, and I didn't really fit the paradigm of what they considered to be normal, I guess, for a child. And I remember my mom at one point telling me, well, it's important that you fit in. Why don't you just find find somebody that's in your world that looks like they fit in and they seem to be doing it right, and just be like them. And so that was the advice I got as a kid. So that's why this message kind of really was like, wow, that's me.
It's interesting. As you were talking, what I'm thinking is I would imagine what Shaltazar is trying to tell us, that one of the prerequisites of honoring the authentic you is letting go of the opinions of others.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the the overriding themes there. And something else that I noticed with my kids and my kids' friends is that piece that talks about this feeling of uniqueness that we all have. We know that we are different. We're unique energies, and we spend a lot of the time during our lives trying to kind of push that uniqueness that we feel, exchange it for something external and visible that other people can see. It says in here, some of you are dressed differently, you wear your hair differently, you may put ink drawings on your body. It's all these things that we do to try to differentiate ourselves from others, perhaps because, and this is a really unformed thought, but we're all part of the same collective, right? We're all part of the same energy. We're all brothers and sisters of the same creative materials, and yet we're here as individual beings on this planet, and we go through all these external exercises to try to stand out and to try to be unique and to be recognized above the crowd. And that doesn't seem to be what Shaltazar is suggesting we should be doing, I guess.
Yeah, I think you say it's an unformed thought, but you're onto something big, because having listened to that this morning, and I didn't really have that busy a day, which is kind of interesting. So I got a chance to really contemplate this, reflect on it, and what came to me is this brings us back to that paradox, the unity separation one. The uniqueness is around our separation from others. The individual, right, is separate, and yet humanity is the collective. And so how do we balance, how do we move above that uniqueness, that desire to honor our uniqueness, but also to get along with each other? It was kind of interesting, because as I was listening, and I chose to listen to it twice, because the first time I zoned out. I guess I was feeling a bit tired from that new moon energy, and then when it was over, it was like, oh gee, I better listen again, because Mark may say something where I missed out on that. Talk about the opinions of others. It's like I was back in school again, saying I didn't read that textbook fully, that chapter. Yeah. I better read it again. So I listened to it again. Yeah, I listened to it again, and there's this nagging feeling about the Shaltazar promoting us to be the authentic us, but yet in other messages they're talking about the brotherhood of humanity, the sisterhood of humanity. And so how does our individual authentic self fit into the collective? Because if we are all really honoring our authentic self, how are we ever going to get along? How are we ever going to have peace? How are we ever going to stop the wars? And so this message took me off in that direction, because I really believe that Shaltazar is not saying this from a place of selfishness. I don't think they're saying be unique, be authentic, and be selfish and not care about fellow humans. I think what they're saying is that when you take care of yourself, when you honor your authenticity, you're going to feel so much better about yourself that you are able to respect and honor the diversity amongst your fellow human beings.
Yeah. I mean, that really kind of hits a chord with me, because if you are able to honor that authentic part of you, you're much more willing to honor that in other people, right? And so you're willing to, accepting, they always, everything they always say, it all starts with you, right? So, you are the change, in the world. You change you change yourself, you change the world. So if you are able to accept the uniquenesses and peculiarities that are what you're made out of, then it seems like you'd be much more inclined to accept those uniquenesses and peculiarities in another person. You're not judging you, you're not judging them, right?
Right. I think that is the subtlety of this message. There's been a few messages lately that you've chosen where Shaltazar, I think, clobbers this over the head, and it's very, very direct. This one is a little bit more subtle. They don't come out and say that, but I really sense that's what they're moving towards. They are saying, feel good about yourself, and then you will feel good about others. And so I think that's the big takeaway for me, is working on my uniqueness, my authenticity. And they even say that it's programmed in our DNA, that we have these setups, that we have these individual traits that we incarnate with as part of the setup to be able to find who we truly are. And I think that they're so unique. It's interesting, as you were talking about growing up, the image of me crying myself to sleep as a teenager, and not as a baby, but as a teenager, wailing that I didn't fit in, and I was really tired. And it was so interesting that, by no means was I a poet, but I guess it was a precursor to what I was going to be doing later in life. I think I came up with this poem that said that, how did it go? That a man of himself is better than two of some other. And so there I was in because English was my absolute worst subject, trying to understand my uniqueness, my authentic self, and trying to convince me it was okay to be who I truly was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's this message may point to. I think that the teen years are the kind of the apex of this whole message, because it seems like that's when the two intersecting lines of your authentic self and who the world expects you to be. That's when they seem to be most at odds. That seems to be the breaking point, and you either, I guess, come to understand it and realize it and embrace the authentic you at that point and move through your life in that direction, or you deny it and you continue operating according to the crust that other people have put on you, and the public self that you've created to fit in, and you have that reconciliation later in life, maybe.
Right. That's where we all require the therapy and the coaches and all of that. But I think you're onto something, Mark, and that is that we need to put effort into those teenage years. If we can get a generation of teenagers with the support they need, because the teenage years are where we begin to find our independence, where we want to cut the strings from our parents, where we don't want to be controlled. Mm-hmm. But in order to do so, and Shaltazar leads me to believe that your unique power rests in your authenticity. And so, therefore, if you don't have the courage to be authentic, you're kind of working on half power, right? Think about this. Think about your teenage years, mine, your kids, my kids. It was a struggle because you didn't have that sense of confidence, that sense of worth, that sense of power to be able to manifest. So you were really being deprived because half of you wanted to fit in, and half of you wanted to nurture your authenticity. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really, really important that we go back in coming generations and focus on those teenage years, because I think that's what's going to make the big change in humanity, is when teenagers understand this uniqueness and authenticity in a way where they're comfortable with it, so that they will be more comfortable with the diversity. And I certainly know that my kids honor diversity more than I did, and I honor diversity more than my parents did. So we are moving towards that. We just have to hasten that a little bit.
Yeah. It seems like, well, we've talked about the timelines of everything speeding up. It seems like that slow and steady evolution is now, the bell curve is starting to get steeper as we move along. Yeah.
One other point I just want to raise, and we're getting short on time, and that's you and I broached it before we got on the call, and that is, I believe when Shaltazar is talking about your authenticity and it's part of your DNA and it's part of the setup, they are talking about a continuum. They're not talking about a definitive. They're not talking about, in your case, creative, or in your case, spiritual, as a particular mark on the scale. They're talking about the fact that if you're creative, your creative authenticity can be one thing in your 20s and another thing in your 50s or 60s. And so in order to really honor that authenticity, you have to realize that there's a continuum, and you have to recognize the propensities. You have to recognize those strengths and weaknesses. I remember in my corporate days, when we used to do performance evaluations, we would talk about strengths and weaknesses, and I would spend most of the time, unfortunately, talking about a person's weaknesses. That's not where their authenticity is. Their authenticity is in their strengths. And so therefore, I believe it's important for us to understand our strengths and move to our strengths. And, anybody that's into astrology or birth numbers, I refer to my birth number often because it gives me a bit of a hint as to what my, my energy that I came forth, what my authentic energy is, my authentic power. And if you can understand that and cultivate it so it can get even stronger, then I think that's what Shaltazar is talking about. That's where you really stand in your power. So if mine, we'll bring it back to the beginning of our conversation. If your strength, your authentic strength, is in your feminine energy, if you are a man and you disassociate from that, then you're doing yourself a lot of harm. If you can associate with it at a young age and continue to let it build as you grow older, then you're really going to strengthen the authentic self, strengthen your personal power.
Interesting. Yeah. And it always seems to come back to, that heart-centered approach to things, right? I mean, if you had to put them in buckets, the non-authentic self or the world opinion of you is definitely something that is manufactured in the left brain, whereas the right side, or the heart-centered side, is that part of you that is bubbling up from somewhere inside that is just telling you, this is how this feels to you, instead of this is what I think it should be. So,
well, and it's interesting you raise that point, because in that message, they talk about how do you know what is your authentic self, and they say it feels different, that they're saying that it comes from the feeling consciousness. So if you are to embark on that journey of self-discovery to find the authentic self, Shaltazar is saying you need to engage that heart-centered consciousness. You need to engage the feeling consciousness, because you know yourself that your creativity just feels different than your logical brain. You were telling me about all the fun you have doing invoicing and how uncomfortable that is. Yeah. It's not your authentic strength, it's not your authentic self, because it feels encumbered, it feels awkward, it doesn't feel as natural as your writing and your other creative ventures.
Right. Yeah, that's true. It's it's almost like it's that natural part of you that's screaming to come out that we need to start listening to and letting it come out and stop trying to suppress it.
And therein lies the essence of that message, right? The authentic you. I think that in a very subtle way was what Shaltazar was encouraging us to do, to find that. And it was the late Wayne Dyer that used to tell a story of the adventures of Ivan Illich. And at the end of the book, he's on his deathbed, and he says, "Was my whole life a lie?" And that's really what Shaltazar is encouraging us not to be faced with. At the end of our life, you don't want your life to be a lie. So find the authentic you, cultivate the authentic you, and show up from the authentic you more of the time.
Amen. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and thank you for choosing this message, and thank you for having a very enlightening conversation. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. I enjoyed it myself. Thanks very much.
Hope the listeners liked it. Love and light to you all.
If you have any questions about the Master Teachings of Shaltazar, we invite you to submit them to Jeffrey at jeffreyeisen.com, and we will make your question the topic of a future episode.